Hey, this is Jason Heiner with Tech Republic, and I'm here with my Tech Republic colleague, Connor Forrest, and we're going to talk about today's Apple event, October 30th, 2018, the big iPad and Mac update event. So, Connor, there was a lot that they talked about today. Why don't we start with the iPad Pro? Why don't you give us a quick rundown of what happened of the three announcements at this event? It was the most significant. There was the most in that one. The other two, the Mac updates, which we'll talk about in a minute, were more incremental. What are sort of the biggest things that they announced today? And then we'll talk about especially what pros are going to be interested in.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Apple updated its iPad Pro line. For those who are not familiar, that's kind of the more enterprise-focused version of the iPad. It comes in two larger form factors than you traditionally see in the iPad line. With this new 2018 iPad Pro, the most glaring differences were in the form factor itself. So in keeping the same kind of 10.5-inch form factor and extending the display out to the edges, using the LCD liquid retina display, which is what we saw with the Apple iPhone XR, Apple was able to squeeze 11 inches of display or screen size out of that same form factor. They kept the 12.9-inch display size, but just shrunk the body down for the larger of the two. We saw just physically, we saw squared off edges. We saw the lack of a home button. Apple got rid of that in light of using Face ID. So we see that same true depth camera on the front as well. A12 Bionics chip, 12X Bionics chip is going to see really improved performance for on the computing side of things. Also really saw a bump with using the neural engine and the kind of separate 7-core GPU is going to see a lot of big graphics bump there. I think one of the Apple leaders actually said that it is the same or similar graphics performance to the Xbox One, but in a 95% smaller form factor or package. The other really big thing was the revamping of the Apple Pencil. So Apple added some new functionality with taps on the side of the pencil. The pencil itself is going to be able to magnetically attach to the iPad on the side. It will be able to automatically pair with the iPad it's attached to. We saw similar motion with the plugins for the new Apple mouse and keyboard, and also wirelessly charge off of the iPad. For everyone who wants a headphone jack, sorry, that's gone now too. So we're all the way over to the USB-C, Apple's USB-C version, the Thunderbolt port or Thunderport, whatever they call it, in port. But what's really cool about that, and I think would be really interesting for traveling professionals especially, is it can charge out. So if you have a new iPad Pro from 2018, you can use that to charge your iPhone. So those are some of the key things we see. Obviously, the A12X processor, that's faster computing power, a better display, display out to the corners, and different kind of form factors there. Also, Face ID for more secure authentication.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So they dropped a little bit of shade in this one too, right? They talked about the fact that there's been a lot of sense that the iPad was a little bit of a declining property, in recent years until they've done these Pros, which have reinvigorated the iPad a little bit. And they launched this by saying that the iPad, they have sold 44 million iPads over the past year, which is more than any of the leading laptop makers have sold laptops. So that was interesting. They also talked about the fact that this new A12X Bionic chip is faster than 92% of the PCs sold in the past year, including Core i7 models. So dropping a little bit of shade on Intel there a bit as well, right? But you mentioned, Connor, the USB-C charge port that it has now, which it also uses to charge from. And they talked about some new peripherals, which you and I have talked a little bit about, our readers, our professional readers. These are the kinds of things they'll really be interested in. They said that you could, if I remember this right, use a 5K display off of that USB-C port in the iPad Pro. So all of those things are definitely things that are going to appeal to pros. Also, maybe one more to add was Adobe was there and showed off the full version of Photoshop running, or a full version of Photoshop. I don't think it's the desktop version, but it's a, much more full like version of Photoshop on the iPad Pro, which they showed, which was cool. And but they said it's not coming until 2019.
Right. Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, there's also the Smart Folio, the new peripheral Apple's announced, which makes it kind of more similar, I think, or more competitive to the Surface line as well, having that kind of Apple branded folio. They've had done things like that in the past, but I know that this one has some new features. And it seems like instead of really adding, pencil support to the iPhone, like everyone thought they were going to do with iPhone XS and XR, they're really kind of hammering home a kind of pencil stylus for the iPad, keeping that in line with the tablet side of things. So that's an interesting move when some of the other phablet devices are doing that kind of thing. But I'm really excited about the Apple Pencil. I think it could do some really cool things on the creative side of things, but also for folks that want a tablet or a larger form kind of display to take notes and to be able to kind of doodle on the screen and mark things up as they're creating presentations. It's a really good option if you're working in the Apple ecosystem.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so let's talk about Macs a little bit. Let's sum up what they announced in Macs. Let's start with the MacBook Air. They basically announced a more airy version of the MacBook Air. So the MacBook Air, as we know, has been super popular, even as they've announced new a MacBook and then the MacBook Pros on the MacBook Air. A lot of that was because of price. Was the reason. It was the lowest entry point into the Mac ecosystem for a laptop. But it has lagged. It hasn't had a Retina display. It's lagged some other things. They have finally updated that now, and so that will probably become, I guess the question is this likely to become the standard laptop that businesses that are using Macs hand out to users? So why don't you sum up for us the MacBook Air and what they did there?
Sure. So obviously another huge shift in the form factor. They smaller overall volume. For a while, like you were mentioning, folks have been complaining about the lack of a Retina display. So Apple added the Retina display. They added a Touch ID and a little sapphire crystal key up at the top right of the keyboard there. And they made the trackpad itself larger, added the kind of Force Touch, so we get away from that kind of springboard click there. They also made that a little bit quieter. There's new backlighting, LED individual backlights behind each key to make the more accurate backlighting there. And obviously, at MacBook Air, so we have full flash storage, continuing that trend, obviously, enhanced compute power, and just really an overall better looking device. Obviously, they cut down on a lot of the ports. That's kind of Apple's thing now. I think they kind of got a reputation after getting rid of floppies and CDR drives. And so now they're just kind of doing away with all of them. So I think that's the riskiest bet they're making by eliminating all the ports except for two of their USB-C version, the Lightning or Thunderbolt port on the side. With that said, they have kind of come up with a lot of adapters for those kind of things. And folks who are used to that Apple ecosystem, especially professionals, are likely going to be used to it by now. But to get folks to make the switch, to bring them over to the side, I think that could possibly be a detriment. But, the screen looks a lot better. They don't have that aluminum bezel around the screen anymore. So they've kind of pushed that to the side with the full glass with the black bezels. But they also still have that camera in the front for FaceTime. So you're not getting that camera down at the bottom. And some of the other competitors, I think Dell makes one where the camera's looking up your nose. So you can still kind of have those really professional looking video calls with that better display as well. So overall, they just kind of took every little aspect of what makes a MacBook Air, like you said, and made it more airy, right? They kept the small form factor. They kept the really nice kind of features and appointments, but really just kind of added a little bit extra on every aspect of the device itself.
Yeah, so just to sum up, 17% less volume, 10% thinner, down to 15.6 millimeters thin. 2.75 pounds down from 2.96 pounds from the previous model. We're talking 13-inch here in
Right,
this.
13.3-inch total. And I think
Yeah.
to your point, to your question earlier about whether this can be kind of the de facto MacBook for professionals, I think people underestimate how much the small form factor and lightweight play a difference. With the rise of remote work, with a lot of folks, especially in tech traveling for work, being able to throw something in a backpack or in a bag and barely notice that it's there, kind of similar to the old iPads kind of size and weight, and really not have to think about it, especially having that all-flash storage. You can kind of shake it around and not really worry about disk corruption, things like that. I think it definitely could. Like I said, the only concern I would have is that lack of ports on the side.
I'll add two concerns to that. Two things that were a little bit puzzling to this for me. One is the $11.99 starting point. So that is, $1,200 for this. You have to really, really want it at that point, where some of these, previously the under $1,000 MacBook Airs were a lot more appealing. With as good as Chromebooks are getting, right? And you can get a really good Chromebook for $500. You can get a decent Chromebook for $200. That $1,200 now, they're just moving further and further upstream. It's a challenge. Obviously, you're only getting this if you really are serious about, doing a lot of kind of creative work. You have to think, or knowledge worker kind of work, creating PowerPoints, creating different kinds of documents, spreadsheets, so on. So that's a little bit of a question to me. I think that puts this maybe in a less attractive space for some professionals and some businesses, especially buying these in bulk. The other one that was a little weird was the Touch ID. I think it was great they got rid of the Touch Bar. They replaced the Touch Bar in the MacBook Pros with back to the standard keys, function keys, and volume and all of that, which is a smart move. And then added the Touch ID, which has been great thing on the on those new MacBook Pros. Here, they made a big deal about how they've made this Touch ID with the T2 security chip more secure, more, function better. But it's one of those weird things to me, because really the fingerprint scanner they've made a big deal on the phone is less secure, right? The Face ID. And on the phone, this Touch ID makes almost more sense, because there's times you're not looking straight, you're not running your phone right there, if you're in your car, or you're in bed or whatever. And, Face ID doesn't work very well. It's almost the opposite. When you're at your computer, you're looking straight ahead at it all the time. So that's a perfect place to put, Face ID, right? So they should have left Touch ID on the phone, and they should have put it on the laptop. It makes more sense. So the fact that it's the other way around, I think is a little bit odd and a sort of a strange design choice. But
Right.
That said, good stuff on the MacBook Air in general, and it's good that they did do the upgrade. We'll just see how many professionals stick with it. How about we switch to the Mac Mini? Let's finish with that. Let's talk a little bit about this. It's been a long time since they revved this one. What are they doing there?
Yeah, I mean, so with the Mac Mini, we're expecting a form factor change. Didn't really get one. It's kind of like a darker color gray. So if you wanted a smaller Mac Mini or one that looks radically different, sorry, you're not going to get that on that front.
Now in space gray. That's it.
That's the big announcement. But
inside a lot more though.
Yeah. They did offer. They're basically really gearing the Mac Mini toward the market for professionals. From what we're seeing, a lot of these specs that they announced, really, the options for storage are pretty strong. The options for memory are really, really strong. The ability to connect to a host of new peripherals, that's always been the Mac Mini's kind of calling card, right? The ability to have that Mac experience with the peripherals of your choice. If you don't want to go with a fully kind of contained iMac, you can kind of build out what you want. Unfortunately, the iMacs kind of went past it in terms of specs, as did the MacBooks. But I think it's a smart move for them to bring this back. Now, to your point, with the MacBook Air and Mac Mini, they're both jumping up in starting price. So I think
Yeah.
the previous Mac Mini was right at about $499, and I believe the new one starts at $799.
Yep.
And the same thing with, you know, the MacBook going up a few hundred, MacBook Air going up a few $100s as well. But with that being said, the amount of performance you're getting for that price bump is pretty strong. So the big thing for me was it moves to all flash storage, which is really important. And I think also it had a 1.6 starting really processor, 1.6 gigahertz that's expandable with their turbo boost up to 3.6 gigahertz. And I believe that was a Core i5. And then I think from what I remember, it's expandable up to a 1.5 terabyte solid state drive, which I'm assuming will likely be very, very expensive.
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of the examples that they gave on stage were, you know, linking these together to use them like a mini server farm, or using them to compile code outside of your MacBook Air or your MacBook Pro so you can be freed up to focus on other tasks. It was very clear that the Mac Mini is going to be this kind of, obviously a standalone device,
Yeah.
but they're marketing it as kind of this complementary satellite device to really help professionals who are in kind of high, you know, power user situations where they're using a lot of compute, a lot of storage,
Yep.
get a lot more stuff done outside their primary device. And I think that's a really interesting proposition. So that's kind of the summary of, you know, same thing with the MacBook Air. They're really upgrading it on all fronts: storage, memory, processing power, and, you know, but on this side, there's a lot more ports on the Mac Mini. So
Yes.
there's quite a few of the there's a couple of USB-A ports in there as well. There's an HDMI port. So you have quite a few more options for connecting peripherals, as you should,
Yeah.
with a device that is not fully contained.
Yeah, it's they've taken everything that the MacBook, or sorry, the iMac does well and put it into this little device at $799. I think that's really smart. It goes up to 64 gigabytes of RAM, just like the iMac, which is great. They talked about people are using these as mini server farms. They mentioned a company that's using 8,000 of these in a server farm. You know, we're looking at, maybe we'll do a feature story case study on that on Tech Republic. So yeah, I think they did everything you'd kind of expect that they should do with the Mac Mini. It has all the ports. It's got you know, it can even go up to 10 gig Ethernet. So they've updated it in every way to all the recent specs, and they've needed to do that. $799 is a little bit higher, you know, but as a desktop, that's a solid performance, you know, good price for a solid performing device. I agree with you. I think it was pretty interesting that they started pitching these as a way for, if you're a video editor and you have an iMac or a MacBook Pro, you can have this connected, and when you're rendering video, you just send it over to this and let it render your video for you, or compile your code, or you know, process some photos as well. They mentioned another scenario there. So that was really interesting. That was new. And I think professionals will dig that. And I think there's some who will certainly take advantage of those kinds of scenarios. They also played they played up sort of music professionals and film professionals using these things, or, you know, filmmakers using them as well. And so they're playing to that audience. You know, they didn't tease the Mac Pro. That's the one thing that's still out there that they need to do. And I, as I've said many times before, I have my doubts that they're going to get that right, because they haven't given the right indications there. They need to just build a decent tower again for professionals, that's very expandable, that has all the ports, and that doesn't try to look cute like the trash can Mac and sort of other things. They just need to build a really good solid tower if they want to keep video editors and photographers and those kinds of things. They will have to do more than what they've done with the Mac Mini and the MacBook Air and even the MacBook Pros. But it is great to see them putting more attention back on the Mac again.
Right. And I think, you know, like to your point, you know, for folks in that area, techies, gadget folks, they're tinkerers. They're gonna want to tinker.
Yeah.
So you can't be that protective of the hardware and try to give people this special designed form factor, right? That works in some industries, right? You know, that's very valued in the creative space, having that that design. But like with the trash can Mac, they made some really cool moves, having it, you know, developed in Austin, and then also with these newer Macs that we're seeing today, the Mac Mini, MacBook Air, they're really revamping and focusing on their green initiatives. So a lot of them are made from 100% recycled aluminum, which is great. A lot of recycled tin, a lot of recycled components, which is great. So I'd love to see that trend continue as well. But also, to your point, yeah, the thing we're missing is still the Mac Pro. And I just, like every power user that I know keeps saying, bring back a tower that I can tinker with, that I can expand, that I can make fit my needs. And that's really the only message that I've heard on that side of things. So I think you're absolutely right. That's what we're missing. And, I'm holding out hope that they get it right, but only time will tell. So.
All right, we'll see in 2019 because I think this is it for Apple in 2018. All right, thanks, Connor. Good stuff. You can find more on Tech Republic has cheat sheets on each of these products, so you can read more, dig deeper. Also, you can find more coverage on our sister sites, CNET, ZDNet, and download.com. And to keep up with the latest in tech, of course, always subscribe to Tech Republic's Top Story of the Day newsletter. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.